Yeah. Thank you, Al.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I think you've probably introduced me 100 times over the years, and it's the politest you've ever been. So thank you. We should have recorded that. uh, Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the group. I always like coming to the transitions group. Um, yeah, I have started a new role this year. I actually started the day after the lockdown, which has been interesting. Working for being a servant to, I guess you'd say, about 40 independent churches around the country, trying to help them as a network and also help the pastors of those churches as they work. So tomorrow is our annual general meeting. Should be a national conference, but it's turned into one day of Zoom. So tomorrow I get to speak to around 150 pastors, and I've chosen to speak to them on this topic of endurance. And I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks. Peter asked me last week, would I speak to the group? Why pick endurance? That is, I've noticed with people in running churches, if you're not a churchgoer, so you might be able to think this through. If you are, you may get it quicker. I've noticed that people running churches now are much more likely to suffer from some kind of burnout or stress-related problems than, say, 30 years ago when I started. And I've been trying to think about why. Burnout among those pastoral, the caring professions, but it's also happening in the business world. Last year in May, the World Health Organization officially classified workplace burnout as an occupational phenomenon. There you go, found that on the net. They listed burnout with three main factors: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficiency or efficacy. And one of the consultants says he thinks this is going to be an epidemic and will get worse. So I don't know whether you've seen that in the workplace, or even I think actually searching for a job would be, may well push you towards burnout as well, because that is very hard work. So what I'd like to do is to talk to you about the three problems that I can see that apply to the pastors that I deal with, who are trying to lead a community or lead an organisation, and the organisations they lead vary from 30 or 40 members up to 2,000 members. And then you may like to think through, how would this apply to life generally or into the business world? It's interesting how often the New Testament, so I teach the Bible to people, the New Testament talks about endurance regularly, and the idea of keeping on going. In fact, if you used to read in the New Testament, in the book of Colossians, that's the Apostle Paul's letter to the Christians in Colossae, a town in modern-day Turkey, he talks about praying for them that God would give them endurance and patience. And when I've looked around, the New Testament talks about endurance 28 different times. So it's the idea of how do you keep on going? Now, as I've read some of the literature, there's lots of stuff about self-care and endurance. So the consultants will tell you, okay, well, what you've got to do is look after yourself. You've got to eat right, sleep right, exercise, take holidays, have still kind of quiet time, etc. But I think there's actually a deeper level in terms of worldview. And what I'd like to do is just give you three different aspects of worldview, and why that can be a struggle in terms of endurance, or I guess endurance and burnout are the opposites, why they're issues, and then some of the wisdom that I think the Bible brings to that, and then see what you think. So you can call it worldview. Well, that'll do. The first one that's interesting that I'm going to talk to them about, the Bible describes it, the older translations of the Bible used to call it the fear of men. I guess we could update it and call it the fear of people. What does that mean? It means worrying too much what other people think of us, being concerned about other people, particularly their opinions and their actions. Now, that is very much the air we breathe, and it's so much the air we breathe that I think often we don't notice it. We live our lives looking sideways, worrying what other people think, or wanting the positive opinions of others. I'll tell you a random place that I've noticed it. I live in Bondi Junction, right, in the middle of Sydney, where the traffic is just hopeless around here. And yet just around the corner is a beautiful silver Ford Mustang. It's a 5-litre V8 the Mustang makes. They make it now. They've just started re-importing them. This guy's got a 5-litre V8 in Bondi Junction. There isn't a road in Australia where, apart from the Northern Territory, where you can drive at more than 110 kilometres an hour. In Northern Territory, you can drive at 130. Any little car with a rubber band for an engine can do 110 kilometres an hour. And around Bondi Junction, this guy will not get that Mustang out of second gear. But why has he got it? I'll tell you why he's got it. And I can see some of you smiling. You know, because I've noticed. And everyone else has noticed it. Hey, look at that. It's look at me. Wow. Now, that's if you like, that can be a kind of a positive, hey, look at me. It certainly worked for him with me. Hey, look at me, look at me. I've got this beautiful silver 5-litre Mustang. But if we spend our lives worrying about what other people will think, or being, if you like, prisoner of the opinions of others, it can really have a detrimental effect on us. And I'll tell you how it can happen. It can make us work too hard. And that is desperately trying to climb the ladder and be successful, etc., kind of flogging ourselves. I know, ironically, when I first left Bible college, I worked way harder than I needed to, spoke at a whole lot more things than I needed to. Why? Because I wanted a reputation as someone who was capable. When I worked in the business world, I remember I worked for Berger Paints years ago in marketing work. And there were guys who would sit in their office. Some of them would just sit there and read the paper, but they'd sit in their office until their boss left, because they wanted the reputation of working long hours. So literally they'd sit there till whatever it took. When the boss left, they'd fold up the paper and then they'd go. Or it'll affect us, if we're worried about the opinion of others, it'll affect us in terms of not being able to say no to unreasonable demands or requests. It'll also mean we're unable to confront people. And it is interesting that Jesus teaches that actually we should live our life with an audience of one, concerned for God and what he thinks of us, rather than looking sideways. And that to live with an audience of one, as he did, will set us free. So that's one. The old label, the fear of man or the fear of people. The second one, I think, is, now I said this to Peter and Peter corrected me, I'd call it the Messiah syndrome. And that is, for pastors anyway, they'll know what I mean. And that is, you're thinking, I've got to save the world. Peter corrected me, probably a better way to put it is, I'm indispensable. So to think I'm the one that's got to control all these things, I'm the one who's got to do all of these things. What I've learned is the thing that'll kill you in life is making yourself responsible for the actions of other people. Okay. I've had to learn that the hard way. I cannot control other people. Now you might think, no, wait a minute. Well, I'm a dad. I've got kids. I'm responsible for them, aren't I? Or I'm a manager. I have employees. I'm responsible for them. Or I'm a son or a daughter. I'm responsible for my parent. No, you're not. We're only responsible for ourselves. Our job is to be the best son or daughter, father or mother, manager or employee we can be, but other people are responsible for their own actions. And if we make ourselves responsible for other people, it's a recipe for burnout, because we can't control them. I know I run around madly and try and get things right and do whatever, and my wife will look at me and say, the job of Jesus is already taken and you're not him. So anyway, if you might get what she means. So the great thing is to learn to not make ourselves responsible for things we can't control. And if ever there was a year to learn that, it would be 2020. there's a part of the New Testament that I think probably should go on every calendar of 2020 that says this. The book of James. James was the half brother of Jesus. He says this. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go and go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. And so, how can I put it? We've got to learn not to make ourselves responsible for things we can't control. And the third one, if I could say, so it's the fear of what other people will think, making ourselves responsible for things we can't control. And the third one is perhaps the biggest one, and that is anxiety. Let me say something that I've learned, and you may think, oh, thank you, Captain Obvious, but it's been really significant for me, and that is this. Anxiety is always about the future, never the present. You might be suffering and it might be painful or whatever, but that's in the present. You may suffer in the present. Anxiety is always about the future by definition. I recently had almost 2 weeks up in North Queensland on a cattle station, just basically been blowing some steam out in the bush. And I was living with three blokes up there, camping with them. And they're just ordinary kind of Aussie blokes about my age, a bit younger, maybe in the 50s. 2 of them are on medication for anxiety. It's not immediately obvious, but you sit around a campfire and talk about things, and if you listen, and they need medication to be able to function properly. A little bit of research, 1 in 6 visits in Australia to a GP, 1 in 6 is anxiety related. And the Beyond Blue website says 1 in 5 Australian men will experience an anxiety condition in their lifetime, and 1 in 7 women. And that's not just, I'm feeling anxious, that's enough life, how can I put it, that's enough effect on their lives to go and seek medical treatment. So anxiety is huge, and it can just chew the soul out of us, really. Jesus' answer? Well, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, we're not in control, but there is a God who is, and a God who cares for the sparrows and the wildflowers, and how much more for those people who trust him. But in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, this is where I learned that the anxiety is always future thing. Jesus says this, so do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. He's saying you can trust God with tomorrow. In fact, anxiety is paying interest on a debt that may never come due. Now, let me take you through those 3. I have to pull up soon, but I'll tell you what I've realised. Fear about what people think, or if you like, trying to win the approval of others, or however you want to put it, that's 1. Thinking I'm indispensable and can control things, 2. And anxiety, all of those mean that we can't rest properly. All of those will mean you can't rest properly. And I'm the guy who has trouble sleeping. So I'm a fellow traveller with that. What will I say to these pastors tomorrow? When you take on the world view of what the Bible says, it'll mean you can learn to live with an audience of 1 and not have to look sideways, understand what we can't control or how little we can control, and yet you can trust God with that, and learn that the future is in the hands of a God who cares for us when we'll trust him. Hard lessons to learn, but I'm going to tell them the more you can embrace that, the more endurance and confidence we can have in our lives. So there you go, Peter. I think I can go on all day, but I think that's what I want to say.
Thanks, Al. I'll just stop the recording.
It's still a bit raggedy.